Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway for another review. Today it's a brand new locomotive from KR Models. This channel is breaking some records at the moment because every single one of my past 5 videos has been a video on a brand new product which has just been released. I don't think I've ever had that many on the trot before. Today we have a brand new locomotive from KR Models, who is a relatively new manufacturer who you might remember for producing the GT3 gas turbine locomotive, which was a very cool and very unusual locomotive. Right now though, they have just released their second locomotive and I have one right here. So this is a loco known as the Fell, and just like the GT3, this was an incredibly unusual machine. In fact, it's one that I'm sure many of you won't have ever heard of before. I know I certainly hadn't before this model came onto the cards. Surprise, surprise. But no, reading about this thing, a fascinating piece of machinery, and if you're interested in the background, stay tuned, I'll tell you all about it in just a moment. But this loco has never been available in 00 gauge before, as far as I know, and therefore it's an all new tooling from KR Models. The price for this was £155.40, which seemed really quite expensive when I first pre-ordered this, but of course now when locos can cost £200 or more, well, it doesn't seem so bad anymore for a new tooled locomotive. So really looking forward to this. I've not had the box open yet, so we're going to take a look together. Let's get started with the KR Models, the Fell. So the packaging is really quite cool. It's consistent with the box that the GT3 came in, so very elegant white with a nice line drawing on the front of the box. Quite concerningly, my model was shipped over from Canada, which is where KR Models are, so overseas, and yet there was no additional packaging supplied. It was literally this model box in this plastic bag in an outer cardboard box with my address on it. So in other words, KR is relying on whatever packaging is inside this box to protect the loco, and most of the retailers I use don't do that. I do think when you're spending this sort of money on a loco, it does deserve some proper packaging. So hopefully that wasn't inadequate, and hopefully we will not see any breakages inside the box. Let me show you the end of the box then. So it's short and sweet this time. It is the Fell DCC Ready BR Green. So that tells you all you need to know. There's nothing else really to see on the box. So for the first time, I think I'm going to lift the lid and let's take a look at the Fell. All right. Nice packaging this though, it does seem to be quality. Right, this looks good. So we've got a couple of bits of paperwork here. Let's have a look at this one to start with. So, nice bit of print work here. We've got a photo of the real loco. Looks like a BR black, that's very nice. What have we got on here? Right, so it looks like just a pack of prototype history and information really. So if you want to pause and read that, feel free to. Like I say, very, very interesting machine, so well worth a read if you fancy it. Okay, and then we've got this, which is presumably about the model, sort of. So there's no explanation really, but this looks like it's a list of DCC functions, which obviously doesn't apply to this model that I've got, but if you've got a DCC or DCC sound one, then that's what you need to pay attention to. And then on the back, okay, the back is upside down for some reason. Again, there's no explanation as to why you want to remove the buffers or remove screws, but presumably that is for body removal. And even though this is super brief, it's just a few sentences, it's full of errors. There are just a push fit, that doesn't make sense, and obviously the con rods, they mean coupling rods. But fair enough, we can figure out what they mean. Reading on, it says, just a small needs to be applied to just behind the rod itself. Just a small what? A small Scottish gentleman? In all seriousness, what is this nonsense, and where are the proper instructions? And why has nobody proofread these notes? Unbelievable. I would hesitate to call them instructions. It's more just a few snippets of information. Maybe there'll be actual proper instructions inside, I'm not sure. But I guess now we know how to remove the body. Right, are you ready? Oh, here we go. So the loco is down in the box. I can already see the counterweights on the coupling rods there, and annoyingly, the box is full of static grass. That's not very good. Has somebody had a play with the model on their layout? Look at that. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Oh, that's really bizarre. So if I'm being honest, it's a bit of a sloppy start, isn't it? Inadequate packaging, pretty much unfinished instructions, and now we've got excess scenic material all over the inside of the box. Well, hopefully the model itself is okay. Let's pull it out. It does seem to be well packaged in here, thank goodness. Yeah, so we've got all sorts of foam in the box. Quite thin compared to what we've seen from the likes of Dapol or even Hornby now with the 9F, but hopefully it did the job. Oh yeah, this sleeve is covered in static grass. What? I don't understand. Right, anyway, let's have a look then. Let's pull out the clamshell. And we've got an accessories pack here, but of course no explanation as to where these accessories go because there's no proper instructions. But clearly we've got some screw link couplings there, which you can fit to the buffer beams. Looks like we've got some route indicator discs as well, and probably some more buffer beam details. Again, some instructions would have been nice to clarify, but most of that seems self-explanatory, I would say. Okay, let's have a look at the loco then. So the GT3 was pretty good in terms of the quality of the build and also the finish of the decoration and such. So I'm pretty confident that this is going to be the same. Wow. Yeah, actually, this is not a satin finish. This is a glossy. Yeah, look at that. That is definitely glossy. A lot of manufacturers don't go for the gloss. Some people think it's a bit too far. I don't mind, to be honest, as long as the finish is hard wearing and it doesn't get easily damaged. But yeah, that is definitely a lot more glossy than most models. And I mean, it's pretty much realistic, isn't it? Real locos are glossy, particularly diesels with metal bodies like this. Okay, there it is. So yeah, this thing looks really cool. I have to say, the finish is throwing me a little bit. I don't know. Does it look a bit toy-like? Not really, but I can definitely see some people saying so. For me, you know, it's hard to argue because obviously, like I say, real bodies are quite shiny, but this does seem to be extremely shiny, much more so than most locos. The weight seems really quite good. The bodywork is made of plastic, but it seems the chassis and underframe here is die-cast and quite well detailed, as you can see. And overall, this clearly does a fantastic job of capturing what an unusual machine this thing looked in real life. So we will talk about that now, I think. I'll give you some background on the real locomotive, and then we'll take a much closer look at this. We'll take in some of the details and see what this model is actually like. Okay, let's get started. The Fell locomotive, or more officially the British Railways 10100, was an incredibly unusual experimental diesel introduced in 1951, built a couple of years prior. It was a joint design between Fell Developments and H.G. Vivert of the LMS, and was built by the LMS at Derby Works. By the time the loco was ready, nationalisation had already occurred, so it entered service as a British Railways locomotive rather than an LMS one. The Fell was intended to address some of the perceived weaknesses of the diesel locomotive concept, and it was designed to be lightweight but extremely powerful, in fact exceeding the power of the Class 5 460s of the LMS. The Fell was unusual outwardly as a result of its 484 wheel configuration, featuring those coupling rods, which is quite odd for a diesel, I suppose. The centre set of rods was eventually removed, but the wheel configuration remained 484 and not 4444, which would have been even more bizarre because all of the drivers were still driven by the single gearbox. Internally though, the design was even stranger, as it didn't have different gears as such. The main gearbox was driven by no less than 4 different engines connected to it by hydraulic coupling. Each of these hydraulic couplings could have the fluid pumped in or drained out of it in order to connect or disconnect the engine from the gearbox. The gear ratio and resulting torque was actually dependent on the number of engines connected. So with a single engine connected, the gear ratio was 4:1, but on the opposite side, if all 4 engines were connected, the ratio would be 1:1, or unity. And it was this system that functioned instead of, say, changing gears to change the torque. So fascinating stuff. The last few years of life were quite rough for the Fel. In 1952, the gearbox was badly damaged after a component came loose and fell into the gearing. A few years later, the steam heating boiler caught fire, causing further damage. And a couple of years after that, in 1960, it was completely scrapped. No other locomotive of this design was built. An improved version was under development at one point, but it was never pursued. Okay, so there it is, up close and personal for you. Okay, we need to jump into this. So the elephant in the room is that the loco is very, very glossy. Like, oops, we've spilt the entire can of gloss varnish all over the model. Do you think anyone's going to notice glossy? Now, like I said earlier on, this is a defensible decision on the part of KR Models because obviously in real life locomotives are quite glossy. But a lot of modelers do feel that this doesn't translate into model form too well because it can have a tendency to make the bodies look a little bit plasticky or toy-like, and the way that high gloss reflects all of your lights, which it is doing here as you can see, isn't too pleasing. And that's the reason why most, in fact every other manufacturer tends to opt for a more satin finish, which is kind of a compromise between matte and gloss, which generally works quite a bit better. I'm not entirely sure where I stand on this, to be honest. I do quite enjoy the gloss finish, but I'm almost certain that there will be plenty who really don't, because of course it's not going to match all your other diesels and stuff. It is very subjective though, so where you stand on that is completely up to you. So yes, extremely glossy. The decoration itself though is fantastic. The lining is extremely neat and tidy. As you can see, the banding is fine. The running number is nicely applied, which is good, and up close the British Railways crest is very high resolution and very highly detailed, so that's good. I also love the way the coupling rods and the counterweights look on this. As you can see, the centre rods are not included with this model. I think on some of KR Fels they are though, so that's interesting. Although admittedly the crank pins are just not painted that well. There's nicks in all of them like that, as you can see. Otherwise though, I don't want to say it comes across as low effort because that's mean, but looking at the model and then combining it with the other stuff that I've already observed, that is kind of the word that comes to mind. In terms of detail, we've got these handrails which are separately fitted but just made of plastic, not metal, and they don't kind of match in colour. The one on the left here looks like maybe they forgot to paint it because it's grey, and the one on the right hand side is white, and all the others are white as well, so not quite sure what's happened there. The detail on the underframe is just moulded into the die-cast, and yeah, the quality of the moulding's not high. Doesn't have great relief, doesn't look dreadfully realistic, particularly compared with what we've seen from the likes of Accurascale and Bachmann this year, and this is a little bit cheaper than those, but only by a few pounds. We've got other handrails, which again I think are just made of plastic. Some of them are a little bit bent up, and we do have a slightly damaged lamp bracket on one end. Again though, that could just be because of the inadequate packaging. I wouldn't say that there's a major problem with quality, though those are the only issues that I've been able to spot. The glazing on the cabs is very, very thick, to the point where it kind of acts as a lens, so that you can't really see inside the cab. Now, I think there is cab detail in there. I can see seats. Maybe I'll pop the body off later, if possible, and figure out whether there is cab detail. But yeah, the glazing is so thick, you can't really see it from the outside, which is a shame, you know, as a premium model. It does, however, have some very finely separately fitted wipers on the outside though, so that looks pretty good. At least most of the grills just seem to be a part of the moulding. We don't seem to have any etched ones fitted to the model, although some of them look really quite convincing. The moulding is quite good, so that's not a big deal. And the moulded detail generally is great. There is a lot of riveting, as you can see, and up on the roof there's a fair bit of complexity, and one or two separately fitted parts over there as well. The ends of the loco are very, very strange. They almost remind me of the GT3 really, with this grille on the end, which is presumably separately fitted. and if I get the angle right, you can see that there is sort of a fan painted behind there. It doesn't look like a real separately fitted fan. I doubt it's going to turn when I turn the loco on, but still quite a nice detail to spot. And then the buffer beam area is complete with separately fitted lamp brackets. Actually, this area looks really good. You've got the lights, which presumably will work when I run the model. And we do have sprung buffers, although the buffers are just made of plastic and not metal. The bogie wheels look pretty good. As you can see, the axles have been nicely hidden, although we do just have the little pinpoints in the centre, which is good and realistic. I like that. And the bogie design seems to be better than on the GT3. It's nicely sprung, as you can see. Plenty of movement in the bogies, and the screws seem to be holding this time, which is good. You can't see much of the loco wheels, but again, they are the spoked type, which is again quite cool for a diesel. And we'll talk more about the wheels and the drive when it comes to the performance and mechanism section. But yeah, otherwise it's relatively simple, isn't it? I'm certainly glad it didn't cost more than it did. I don't know, for £155.40, that's what I paid. It seems about right, doesn't it? The quality isn't terrible. It's certainly not a massively refined and detailed loco like, say, the Class 55, which is the last diesel off the top of my head that I reviewed at a similar sort of price. Yeah, it's not at that level. I think that's objectively true. But to be honest, the quality and the level of detail I think is perfectly adequate for most modelers. I think if you're really picky like I am, then stuff like this is really going to bother you, and it does to a degree. And also you do have to consider whether or not you like the extreme gloss, because it is extreme. And none of my other locos really are quite this crazy on the gloss. But yeah, still, it's an unusual loco, and it's certainly been finished to an unusual standard. Put it that way. Right, okay, back to seriousness. Let's move on. Let's talk about the performance and also the mechanism. Quite interested to see what this one consists of. So there she is, the very unusual and cool looking Fel down onto the track. The first performance test has been completed and filmed, and I will show you that in just a second. The next job was to take a look at the mechanism. Now, before we go into this, I want to overtly state that I did not touch any part of this mechanism before that initial test was filmed. So there is no way to blame me for the terrible performance that this locomotive gave when I first tested it. I'm not going to say anything more about that now, you'll have to wait till the performance section. But again, to be clear, no disassembly was attempted before the performance test was filmed. So, in terms of mechanism then, in many ways the mechanism is a high quality one, pretty good. In some ways, in my opinion, it's a little bit amateurish, and I'll tell you a bit about it. First of all, the weight is okay. It comes in at 413 grams, which is a little bit less than a Bachmann Class 24. So I think that's about right, to be honest, given the loco size. We've got a nice die-cast chassis and underframe, which is largely responsible for that weight. Now, all of the loco drivers pick up to an extent, but they all have pickups fitted to them. The bogie wheels do not, though, and that means that around half of this loco's wheels don't have pickups. Now, there are 8 driving wheels on here, so you might think that's not an issue. Well, it was an issue, and you'll find out more about that later on. The bogies themselves have a massive range of movement. I'm not sure how necessary it is that they can do all this, but I don't think it should be a problem. They're nicely sprung, which is good. And also, they are attached properly, this time with a tight screw. It's not a loose screw that's going to work itself free eventually, so that's really good. The base keeper plate is attached with 6 screws. The brake rigging is quite loosely attached, so I would just say be careful with that. And then once all the screws were out, I found that the base keeper was hardwired in place, which is unfortunate. Most manufacturers use spring-loaded contacts here to make serviceability a little bit easier. Here, it's quite inconvenient. You can, however, see that the driving wheels have proper bearings fitted to them, which is great. It does look as though all driving axles are geared, and certainly all of the axles do have gears fitted to them, and it's certainly designed to have all of the axles driven, but some of the gears have been left out so that it's just the innermost sets of driving wheels which are geared. So the effect there is that these coupling rods are actually used, they're not dummies. There's no issue with the fact that a load of gears have been missed out so that only some of the wheels are driven, but again, it doesn't instill much confidence in the design of this thing when clearly an afterthought has prompted the manufacturer not to include a load of the gears. You know, it just doesn't seem dreadfully professional, but it's not going to have any adverse effect, I don't think. Right, so body removal, this is what you have to do if you want to access the motor, or more importantly, the DCC decoder socket. It's a bit of a faff because the buffers have to be pulled out first, so they didn't find any way to sort of engineer the chassis so that the buffers would clear it while you pull the body off. So yeah, you've got to pull the buffers off your brand new model if you want to chip it. Nice. And then there are 4 screws, and again, this is not a quality setup really, because we've got self-tapping screws which just kind of dig into the plastic of the body. I mean, it's fine, it'll probably do the job, but when some manufacturers fit proper metal screw threads into the models, this is a bit of a stark contrast, isn't it? Anyway, the body eventually comes off to reveal the die-cast chassis. You can now see some of the cab detail. Yeah, it's unpainted, no crew fitted or anything like that, but again, it doesn't really matter because you can't really see inside the cabs. We do have a pre-fitted speaker in here, which I wasn't necessarily aware of. I don't think the instructions mentioned anything like that, but then again, the instructions didn't mention very much at all, did they? And we've got the 21-pin DCC socket inside there. Again, I don't think any of the paperwork mentioned what sort of decoder you need, so there you go, 21-pin. The motor is a fairly modest size motor, I would say, but it does have a flywheel fitted to it, and it doesn't say anywhere whether this is a 3 or a 5-pole motor, so I'm not entirely sure. The gauging was absolutely shocking. I got vastly different results from each axle. So the first one was 14.6, that's reasonably close to the standard, but a little bit over. The next one was 14.4, hooray, we've got one at the standard. The next one was 13.9, that's 0.5 millimeters away from the standard, that's crazy. And then the next one was 14.7, which is again getting quite high above the standard now. And in fact, under closer inspection, the reason why the gauging is so wildly different is because the wheels are not really that well applied to the axles. A lot of them wobble, and that's obviously not at all acceptable on any sort of professional model. So yeah, I mean, it's got the basics, hasn't it? It's got the bearings, it's got a decent number of pickups, it's got the flywheel, looks like a quality motor, but then parts of it just don't quite seem right somehow, do they? And on that note, let's move on and show you the performance test. Okay, time to see what the performance is like on this then. So, forwards direction, let's take a look. First question, as always, does the model work? Oh yeah, look at those counterweights. Cool. Oh, it's so odd, isn't it odd? In a good way, mind you. Yeah, those coupling rods going around like that. Very strange. Right. I've noticed we've got some warm white LEDs coming on at the front in forwards. We've got red LEDs coming on in the opposite direction. And depending on the direction, you get cab lights coming on as well. So we've got the cab detail illuminating. I'm noticing a bit of stuttering. Let's try it at 50% speed. It's geared very well. This is 50. Yeah, that's great. Slower speed. It's not been run in yet, of course. All the pickups should wear in and get a lot better as that's been done. But yeah, it's not doing it now, I don't think. Oh, maybe a little. Yeah, it seems like a good smooth performer, to be honest, doesn't it? Let's see what the crawl is like, and then we'll have a look at the torque. Here we go. Let's go forwards. I'm just going to ease it up very gently, see how slow it can go. Again, this might be better once it's running, but actually, it's going pretty slow already. Cogging quite a bit. That might or might not get better after running in. But yeah, the control down at the low end seems to be awesome. Right, now I'm going to put my finger in front of the buffers and turn it up to 50, see if it's got decent torque. Not really. Yep, not really. Alright, so we'll see if that improves as we go on. I've been looking into this a little bit more since the Hornby 9F debacle. Locos do seem to run with more torque on a feedback controller, although I should point out that the controller I use is not a feedback controller, and that's because quite a few manufacturers like to use cordless motors these days, and cordless motors don't like feedback controllers. So for me, there's no choice but to use this Gauge Master as my main controller. But it does mean that some locos don't have great torque. Now, it's not all locos because, like I say, some models I do put my finger in front of and they run perfectly. You know, there's loads of engines like that. At the moment, this one's not doing ever so well, but I don't know, maybe even now it's slightly better. Yeah, it's going a bit more now. But we'll see how it goes. Right, but yeah, it seems fine, doesn't it? Yeah, it's quite controlled at the low end. It's an incredibly unusual locomotive, and I have to say it looks awesome as it runs along. I'm a massive fan of those red counterweights and the coupling rods and the cranks and everything. Yeah, I could really look at that for quite a while, and I guess I'm gonna. Yeah, the low end speed, I mean at this speed it's great. It's not bad at all. It does seem to be quite consistent, doesn't it? It's not reaching stiff points at different parts of the rotation, which is good. Yeah, I quite like that, quite like that. Right, let's see how it gets on around the track. 50% forwards. All right, here we go. First curve. Yeah, handling that curve okay. Up on, ooh. Right, okay, I've got a bit of a cut out there then. So, yeah, nudge, I think. Give it a helping hand. Hopefully this will improve as it runs in. Go on. No. Is it on the track properly? Has it derailed? No, I don't think it has. Okay. So it's struggling. It's cutting out quite a lot around curves and such. And again. That's odd. So I've noticed that it's just the drivers that have pickups. The front and back bogie wheels don't, but that should still be okay. There's still 8 pickups per rail. So let's give it another nudge, see if we can get it to warm itself up. Okay. See how long we get this time. Alright, maybe it's going to be okay now. Yeah, it seems to be going off now, doesn't it? Okay, so in terms of stability on the track, it seems absolutely fine. I've not had it derail around my tight curves, that's good. Continuity-wise, though, it seems extremely poor. It's cutting out constantly. There are things I can do. I might clean the wheels, give that a try. I could adjust the pickups when I look at the mechanism. You'll probably have heard about that already if that's something I decided to do. The track's clean. I went over it with the track rubber a couple of days ago, and of course other engines have been running fine. So yeah, let's just try and run it in, see how I get on. Not dreadfully impressed so far though, folks, I've got to be honest. So clearly I'm having a serious pickup issue here. I'm going to test each of these wheels to see which ones are picking up. I should note there is no springing on any of these axles, so I suppose at the start and end of gradients you could get some wheels coming off the track slightly, which could interrupt power. Right, so I've got controller set to 50. Let's test each pair of wheels. It would actually be good if some of these were not contacting properly, because then there's something I could fix. So first set, no, nothing. Second set, yeah, got power. Third set, a twitching, not reliable. Fourth set, got it. So those are working. Oh no, that's gone now. So this isn't good. So which of these two isn't working? So that one's dead. That one's not making contact. It's twitching. Is this one? Yeah, that one's fine. Were these okay? Yeah, these were okay, these were dead. So a lot of wheels are not contacting, look at that. So that one's not right. This one. That one seems okay. So yeah, that's something I need to do. In fact, I don't think it's possible to run this in at the moment. In fact, I could. Yeah, I could put it on a rolling road and run it in. What I'm not wanting to do is mess about when I was demonstrating genuine issues with the GT3, and I don't want to dismantle this before it's actually properly run in, just so that there's absolutely no way to blame me for any of the issues this loco is already showing. So yeah, I'll run this in on the rolling road, I'll give it its 30 minutes in each direction, and then if I'm still seeing pickup issues, I will adjust the pickups when I look at the mechanism. Okay, let's give that a go. Okay, well, let running in commence then. It's a bit humiliating, I suppose, isn't it? Running in on the rolling road. But as you can see, yeah, that's fine. So it'll get 30 minutes in each direction, like this then, I suppose. Again, to be clear, I don't want to see anybody trying to blame the fact that my layout is on the carpet for this. Obviously, that's completely unrelated. Locos don't perform like this in reviews, and this has been subjected to exactly the same testing as other locos. But it seems to be going okay now, so I'll leave this to it. Hopefully it will be better when we come back. If not, I will have adjusted the pickups and hopefully improved it myself. Shouldn't have to do that, but at least there is a possible solution, and I think for the sake of the review I'm going to have to give that a try if it doesn't improve by itself. So wish me luck, I'll see you shortly. Okay folks, we are back, and look, we're on the track again. So after running in on the rolling road, I popped this back onto the layout and it was exactly the same. And I'm not that surprised really, because when I tested it, of course, multiple wheels were not making contact. So during the filming of the mechanism portion, I did take the liberty of adjusting the pickups. And this was frustrating because, like I say, the base keeper plate is hardwired to the rest of the loco with very short wires. So it's not an easy job to adjust the pickups, and in fact the backmost pickups where the wires are, I couldn't access at all because the wires were so tight and it would have meant desoldering them. I didn't fancy doing that. But anyway, I've now managed to get it to a point where all of the wheels are picking up, one or two not 100% reliably, but they've all got a contact now, and yeah, the loco is not cutting out as much anymore. So annoying. Pickups not correctly adjusted from the factory and not particularly easy to readjust at home, so it gets a bit of a strike for that. The torque is still not fantastic. Let me show you that. I'll run it up to 50% speed. Kind of able to turn its wheels, but not brilliantly. Now what I did do, just to show the difference, was hook up my Hornby HM2000 controller, which is a feedback controller, and I did the same test. And as you can see now, the torque is much better. So if you are having torque issues, then you might want to consider using a feedback controller. But I don't really recommend this because I think coreless motors are the way forward, and a lot of manufacturers advise that coreless motors could potentially be damaged by feedback controllers. That said, the current draw doesn't seem too bad at all. I got 165 to 170 milliamps under no load, so that doesn't indicate any sort of fault with the motor. Incidentally, the Hornby 9F from the other day was drawing about 300 milliamps under no load, which is not normal, I don't think. So I don't think there's any particular issue with the motor in this one. The current draw seems to be relatively normal, but it's not particularly powerful, at least not with a controller that has no feedback. And no, it's not my electrics that are to blame. Yes, you know who you are, and you're very annoying. No, I've got over 500 locomotives. Most of them run on the Gauge Master controller with plenty of torque and no issues whatsoever. When a couple of locos come along that demonstrate poor torque, do you blame the loco or do you blame the electrics? That's all I will say. Anyway, pulling power itself was 0.45 newtons on my regular controller. That's what I always measure the pulling power on, which is the equivalent to around 27 coaches. Although bear in mind at this sort of load, the wheels are struggling to turn themselves. Although perhaps not as much as they were before. It's actually getting a bit better perhaps. So let's see what the performance is like now that the loco has A, run in, and B, had its pickups adjusted. It wasn't really struggling on the straight before with the pickups, but let's see what the difference is. I'm turning it up gradually. Yeah, it's quite good, isn't it? Yeah, it is really quite good. It's not even cogging that much now either. So that's quite pleasing. Yeah, let's try it in the other direction. So the performance is not bad at all, and as you're going to see in a moment, now that I've sorted out the pickups, which I shouldn't have had to do by the way, this is the second KR Models loco that has needed intervention before it will work properly. But yeah, now that I've done it, it's much better, and this is great. This is a really good crawl, which again suggests that there's nothing wrong with the motor or anything, it's just perhaps not mighty powerful. Smooth at all speeds as well. Let's try forwards, go a little bit faster. Yeah, it's reasonably smooth, isn't it? Alright, so to test the pulling power, I've set up 6 coaches, just sort of randomish BR1s. Let's see what the couplings are like. The couplings are mounted directly to the bogies without any pivoting or anything, but of course the bogies themselves can move around, so I don't think there should be any issues there either. Okay, let's go see. Okay. Let's see if I can do this steadily. I'm trying to adjust the focus on the camera as well as the controller, so bear in mind, I'm not great at multitasking, but I think that's okay. Have they coupled properly? Let's have a look. Yeah, I think so. The couplings incidentally do seem to be at perfectly the right height. I've already tested that, and yeah, matches other rolling stock excellently, so that's good. Right, it's improving, isn't it? I think things are looking better than they were a few minutes ago, that's for sure. Here we go then. There we go. So we'll keep an eye on that and we'll see if it slows down very much with a load. On the middle line, I've got the only other KR Models loco that I've got. Cut out on the point. That was a point though, it wasn't just a random bit of track. And we have the GT3. Now, looking at it, this is actually quite a glossy loco as well. I don't think it's as glossy as the Fell is, but even if it was, I don't think it would be quite as distracting as the Fell, because it's not really a livery we're very used to seeing. I think the Fell is so distracting because it's in BR green, it's a livery we see all the time, and it is extremely glossy. But either way, it's no big deal. Well, maybe it is to you. To me, it's not a huge deal, but like I say, just a little distracting. And then on the middle line, a little bit trickier to decide what to run here, but I've gone with the LMS 10,000 loco, another diesel loco with its roots in the LMS, and this one was quite unusual and experimental as well. So there we go. Right, let's catch up with the Fell, see how it's getting on. All right, here we go. Look at that, no cutting out now, that's so much better. And it's actually not really slowing down, maybe a little bit, but you know, it's got a large wheelbase, or at least the drivers are covering quite a wide area, and it's handling this fine, so definitely not as bad as the Hornby 9F. Not fantastic torque, I'm definitely sticking with that, but it can haul a decent number of coaches without slowing down to a crawl. So overall, I think now the performance is definitely within reason, and at last I can start to enjoy this model as the very unusual piece of kit that it is. It does look cool, I have to say. The motion on the sides is just fantastic. I love those coupling rods and the red painted components that spin. Yeah, that all looks wonderful. The lights are good as well. They're decently bright. Yeah, you can notice them, but they're not over the top or anything, so I think that's fine. And the level of detail is definitely adequate in order to make this look modern and detailed, so not a huge problem there either. Yeah, it's not perfect. You know, I've had quite a few issues. There are definitely some features here that are going to be divisive. Some people are going to like them, some people aren't. I think the very glossy finish is one of the more obvious ones, but I've showed you quite a few other bits and bobs that might divide opinion as well. I think this loco is an acquired taste, isn't it? The only major issue was that I had to dismantle the thing to adjust the pickups, but I can't say how widespread that issue is going to be. I don't know whether it's just mine, whether half of them are like it, whether all of them are like it, I don't know. But I have been able to sort it out, so that's okay. Some people are going to struggle to do that sort of thing. It was very fiddly to put the pickups back, so for others it might not be so simple. But either way, yeah, cool loco, and at the moment at least it seems to be working quite well. Let's have some ratings then for the all-new Fell locomotive from KR Models. As you can see from the scores here, it's a bit of a mixed bag really, isn't it? The level of detail, generally speaking, is pretty good. I've given it 4 stars. The decoration is really quite good, all of the paintwork and the printing is fine. The finish is what it is. I think it's just too subjective to say whether it's right or not. I'm not dead keen, but equally I'm not massively against the high gloss either. If you've got a particular opinion on that, please do comment down below. Yeah, the level of detail's fine as well. There's plenty of moulded detail. Quite light on separately fitted parts, I think. The cab detail is really quite basic. The cab windows are a bit thick, not that great, and quite a bit of the detailing is just moulded rather than separately fitted. For instance, the door handles or the grills. But yeah, it's fine. It would have been nice to see a few extras, maybe some painted cab detail, maybe some crew, but it's not a massive deal. Performance, again, is quite a mixed bag. Out of the box, the performance was dreadful. It was just cutting out constantly because of the misadjusted pickups from the factory. Besides that, the performance is okay. The torque is not fantastic, at least not on a regular non-feedback controller, but it can crawl fairly nicely, and now that I've spent some time working on the pickups, it is sort of making it around the track now without cutting out. Some might call that the bare minimum, but I'm going to call it a nice bonus. The pulling power comes in at about 27 coaches on straight and level track, mind you, pulling force of 0.45 newtons. That's not far off the new Hornby 9F, so quite powerful. And it's about the same as an N15, and in real life these were supposed to rival the 460s, so I would say it's about right. Not massively impressive. We've got class 24s, 25s that are more powerful than this despite being about the same weight. But yeah, pulling power, not a massive issue. I think it's going to be more the torque that will get you than the weight and pulling power. Mechanism, I've given 3-star. Like I say, in some ways this is a fine quality mechanism. I like the bearings, flywheel, seems to be a fairly decent motor, I guess. But then you've got issues such as the self-tapping screws, the hardwired pickups, the really shoddy gauging and wobbly wheels and such. So it does have to lose a few marks for that, I think. 3-star, best I can do. The quality, I've decided to give 4-star. Yeah, it's not a bad quality model, to be honest. All of the separately fitted details are fine. No glue visible or anything like that. One or two minor bent parts and slight breakages, such as that lamp bracket. Again, slightly better quality packaging might have fixed that. And obviously the build quality leaves a bit to be desired in terms of the way the pickups were arranged. But yeah, it's generally okay on quality. Value for money then, for £155.40, I think this is a little bit expensive for what it is. Sure, it's a very unusual locomotive, maybe the appeal is not that broad, but nevertheless at £155.40 this should have been a top-notch model, and frankly it's relatively simple in its detailing. It is lacking in quite a few areas. It's got minimal accessories, no crew involved for instance, very poor instructions that don't go into that much detail, and poor initial performance. Now that it's performing better, it's certainly not a bad model, and I don't think it's a rip-off or anything like that. Yes, it's an unusual item, it's going to cost a little bit more, but certainly not a bargain either. So overall that is a modest score of 6.83 out of 10, let down really by the performance and the mechanism more than anything else, but there are minor issues in most categories. So into the logbook we go, 36th place above the Hornby Patriot and below the Gladstone. Now, don't get me wrong, it's certainly better than my Gladstone, I'm not insane, but considering the respective contexts of these two locos, Gladstone was a better experience. So there you have it then folks, that is just about the end of yet another review. This is a loco that certainly has its pros and cons, but there's no getting away from the fact that it's a very, very cool prototype, and you've kind of got to take your hats off to KR Models for daring to build, as they put it, and bringing us something that is so unusual and that you would think would have such a limited appeal. So that is awesome, and KR Models are showing no sign of stopping with that sort of thing. We've got a couple more locos on the way, hopefully quite soon, that are also very, very unusual and a little bit different from the models you might usually see available in 00 gauge. So I really wish them well. I hope we see a lot more like this in the future. I just hope that they can sort out little teething troubles that these locos still seem to have. Again, it's nothing too major. I don't think the gloss finish is necessarily a problem. I think they're going to have to just listen to public opinion on that. If most people like it, then I would stick with it. If a lot of people don't, then I would certainly consider changing it. But I would trust them to do their market research on that. I honestly couldn't say how people are going to vote on that. But if you've got an opinion, pop it down in the comments. I'd love to hear. But I think we'll leave it there then. So thank you for watching. Also include comments of any other thoughts you've got, if applicable. And I'll see you very soon for some more videos. Alright, cheers folks. You take care.